everyone, how is everyone? Welcome to another show of Dark Archives with Willow. And tonight, as you can see, I am joined by Neena Moody from Royal Wolf Whisperers. Um, and we will be talking about Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. Now, I will tell everyone this show is very graphical, so there will be things that you may find that's upsetting. But please do enjoy it. The show. If you can hear me, please say a hello. Um, so how are you, Nina?
I'm alright. How are you?
I am good, thank you very much. Um, I'm just going to give this a wee share out. So how's your weekend been?
It's been alright. Glad that I'm on fall break now.
How long are you off for?
Just a week.
Just a week. I suppose a week's better than nothing.
That's
Um,
true.
duh, 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 duh. So how was your investigation?
It was nice. It was a little quiet, but it was pretty nice.
It looked a beautiful big building.
Can you repeat
Um,
that?
it looked a very beautiful building.
It was very beautiful.
See, I'm jealous because yous guys over there have so much to investigate. It's it's amazing. Sorry, Nina, I'm just sharing this out, sweetheart. Sorry,
No, it's okay.
guys. Um, do you know what I've done before? I've shared it to groups that I wasn't meant to share it to. It's quite funny when that happens. Not funny for them, but funny for me. Um, so I'm glad that you picked this one because when I was reading about Richard Chase, I was kind of like, wow, the vampire. Um, there's so many serial killers out there um, to explore, hence why I made this show. Um, was obviously to sorry guys, I'm still sharing as through as many as I can. Um, please forgive me. Um, but what got your interest in serial killers, Nina?
I would say it was probably whenever I first began watching horror movies, which was,
Yeah.
it started when I was 3. My parents took me with them on a date to go see Saw, and that's when I went down the rabbit hole.
Do you know what? I'm very glad that you mentioned Saw because I am a very big fan of the Saw franchise and I like to debunk. Not really debunk, it's more look at the Saw franchise with a psychological point of view. Um, because if you think about it, in the modern day, people would say that John Kramer was a serial killer. But if you look at it in reality, he wasn't. The people killed themselves. So it's quite a messed up sort of way. Um, I got into crime with my gran. My gran used to watch so many shows, and I found it interesting. And I'm interested in how the mind works, what possesses someone to hurt another human being. Um, so I've studied criminology. Um, and my lecturer said how good I was and how passionate I was about finding out details. And one of the things that we had to do was an essay. Now, it was a 500-word essay on a serial killer. Now, everyone that I picked, everyone else picked. So I thought I would do Charles Manson. Now, I kid you not, Nina, the time I researched Charles Manson, there was so much. I was like, there's no way I would do 500 words about Charles Manson when that man has done so much. Um, so I'll go to the comments. Hi, Julianne. Julianne is an hour and a half from Sacramento. Your dad says, "Hey, David, deep breaths, Nina. Don't worry, David. I'm looking after her." So Richard Chase. Let's look at him. He was an American spree killer. He was a cannibal. He was into necrophilia. And he killed six people in Sacramento in California. And it was from December 77, sorry, to January 78. There's one thing I just couldn't do in this life, and that was drink blood. This man drank the blood of his victims. He he cannibalised the remains. What's your thoughts, Nina?
I mean, it's a little insane to think about having someone kill someone and then you're looking at the dead body and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna try and eat that.
Do you know I had this conversation about cannibalism? Personally, I wouldn't do it. But humanity, when you think, have you ever watched the film called Alive,
Hmm.
where it's a plane crash, and in order for those guys to survive, they eat the basically they eat the dead bodies. I say to myself sometimes when I watch that film, you have to do what you have to do to survive. But this guy wasn't doing it to survive. He was doing it because of his enjoyment. Now, when I researched his life, because I kind of don't know what your thoughts are on the whole nature, nurture. Is it in the person's nature to be evil? Or is it their life that causes them trauma, you know, to cause them to do such things? What's your thought on nature or nurture, Nina?
I think it could play into both of it. I think you could be born that way, or I think you could be made that way. It really just depends on how you are, what your brain is like, and how your life was.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Chase's life, he was born shortly after his parents got married. He had a younger sister. Um, like everyone's mum and dad, they argue quite a lot during the childhood. Um, when they went to Oregon, it was said that his mother accused the father of cheating with a woman that was hiding in the bushes. I'm laughing, but it's kind of no funny. Which basically, ruined the trip. as you would expect. Um, see, mother, his mother had paranoia that the father was drugging her, so that he could have an affair with the lady in question. Um, when Chase got to 5, he he developed tendencies, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the McDonald Triad,
The what?
which is a McDonald Triad. It's a theory suggesting that it's the development of violent psychopathic.
Oh,
Um, it's linked to cruelty to animals, obsession obsession with fire setting, and persistent bedwetting. And this is what Chase was shown at the age of 5. Um, and this also could lead to violent behaviours, um, homicide, sexual predatory behaviours. Um, now, in his like teens, he was a heavy user of drugs, um, such as marijuana, LSD. He discovered that he was important, which prevented him from having sexual relations with women. He's actually one of the strangest behaviours that Chase had was when he started to believe that he was a member of the James Younger gang. He even posted his head into photos of them. So, like, he would create photos of this gang and put his face in the pictures. He even tried to sell these pictures to people, um, and wanted his mum to buy him a cowboy hat, which obviously she refused. Um, he would sometimes sleep in the family lounge room. He would take off his clothes and turn the heater on as high as it would go and then open the windows. But when you actually look at how he was at school, he was described as popular and clean cut during his high school years. But he started to become withdrawn once they entered adulthood and had more of a unkempt appearance. Um, what's your thoughts so far?
he was a pretty. He had a kind of messed up mind from the age.
Yeah.
I know that he started by killing animals. I I know that he killed his mom's cat and showed it to her in the backyard. That
Oh
was,
Jesus.
yeah.
Yeah. I think from there that kind of gives you red flags of, oh my god, he is doing this. Um, what has possessed him? And I think sometimes the parents either turn that blind eye and don't deal with it, or they try to, and the system fails them. It's one of those ones. Hi, Robert. Hi, Nick. Um, but as you say, um, to do that to a cat and then show his mum what he had done, it's mind blowing. Um, Chase developed a problem with his heart. He would often complain that his heart would occasionally stop beating or that somebody had stole his artery. He would hold oranges on his head because he believed that the vitamin C would be absorbed by his brain via fusion. Chase thought his bones had become separated and was moving around. So he once shaved his head to be able to watch the activity. This is how messed up Richard Chase is. That he believes that there's problems with his heart, and he thinks by holding an orange above his head, um, and infusing it into the brain, um, when you look at his work life, um, he was a typist, and he worked in retail credit association. Um, he couldn't really hold down a job, um, because obviously he was using large amounts of drugs. Um, and then he shortly dropped out of the American River College, um, and he became really, really. From there, that's where things started to spiral. And he shared an apartment with two people, and he found them sitting on their front lawn one day, in February 1971, and he began talking with them. And Chase actually convinced them to let them become roommates of theirs. Um, but the two people that he moved in with moved out shortly after because they found that his behaviour was very, very bizarre. Because he was high on drugs. He walked around naked in front of other visitors. He barricaded himself in his room, so that no one was able to sneak up on him. Um, your dad's so funny. I'm surprised Neena doesn't have scary makeup on.
Thought about it.
She's just you kick him in the shins. I see nothing. Um, he then shared an apartment with one of the roommate's brothers and his friends. He would often interrupt them, wanting to play the conga with him. However, they didn't want him. Um, so Chase's parents divorced in '72. Um, your dad says, "I'm at work, lol, she doesn't have a chance." Um, so he frequently fought with his mother. Um, he believed that she was trying to poison him, something which she'd accused her husband during that trip. Um, he was actually arrested in 1972 in Utah, for driving under the influence, and he told his parents that he'd been gassed in the local jail and he was going to sue the police. His father bailed him out of jail and convinced him against not suing the police. Convinced him against suing the police. So as you can see, his life was quite up and down. What's your thoughts, Nina?
I think a lot of that had to do with all the drugs that he was on. I feel like
Yeah.
that definitely impacted it a lot more.
hmm When I kind of look at his life, I kind of think more nature, more than nurture, because it doesn't really suggest that he's went through any trauma, except that his mum and dad used to argue. And as you know, we all have parents who argue. Um, and it's like one of those ones. There's nothing. When I looked at Richard Chase, there was nothing to suggest that there was any sort of problems that trauma that would cause him to do what he did. But you're right in what you're saying. It that is the drug that's affected his brain. And you do find that I'm going to kill my cat because my cat's attacking my feet. Um, but you are totally right in what you're saying, Nina. The problem is the drugs do um mess with the brain and does affect the brain, and you've got to look at that and think, is that enough to plead to insanity? Um,
No.
there's a very famous case just now that when I think about, obviously, when we're talking drugs, I'm thinking of Wade Wilson, the case of Wade Wilson. Um, but going back to Chase, um, he went between his mother and father's, but they even found it difficult with Chase and his erratic behaviours. Um, even the neighbours found them creepy. Um, they would say that he would just stand by the property, blankly staring at it for extended periods of time. Um, at this point, his father didn't believe that the troubles in his life was due to mental health, but rather than lazy work ethic and misguided values. Um, 1972, Chase's mother called the police on him during an argument when Richard suddenly grabbed the phone and whacked her in the head with it. He actually attacked his own mother. Um, Following that, he lived with his grandmother in Los Angeles. Again, more behaviour was shown. Um, he, the grandmother said that she found that his mental state and physical appearance had deteriorated during the second time. Now, there was two times that he lived with his grandmother. But then I say the fun began, but Chase returned to Sacramento in the summer of '73, and that's when things went for the head dive. He began cutting out photos of human organs from a medical book. He was past pasting them all over his bedroom. Um, there was an effort to understand what was wrong with him. Chase called an ambulance to his house. They arrived with a stretcher that he had requested. However, they refused to take him to hospital when they found out that he was not suffering from a medical emergency. What's your thoughts?
I think that's pretty crazy. Everything that's happening, everything that's happened.
Oh god, yeah. Oh god, yeah. When someone begins to show those signs of problems where now it's a well known fact that there's some people out there, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but there is a name for someone who, and it's not hypochondriac before anyone in the comments types hypochondriac, but there is a well known condition that I can't remember the name of, and it basically it's when someone thinks there's something wrong with them all the time. And they phone the ambulance, and they phone the doctors, and they phone, well, for you guys, I don't know the number for the NHS 24, but for us over here, it's 111. Your dad was going to type it as I said it. Dang it, caught me before I typed it. See, I knew you well, David. Morning, honey. It's Lynn. Morning, Lynn. But when Chase did obviously beg the mother for help with these medical conditions, which she got him in contact with two different doctors, which the doctors found that there was nothing wrong with him physically and concluded that he had a psycho disturbance of a major proportion. Um, so in 1973, Chase killed one of his cats when he saw a television story about a cat that received high quality medical treatments, and that story set him off because he he believed that he deserved those treatments. So that was his excuse for killing the cats. What's your thoughts, Nina?
It's very interesting that he thought he deserved the treatments, and that's the reason why he went to go and kill things, living beings, because he thought there was something wrong with him when there really wasn't. He had psyched himself out so much from the drugs that he believed that he deserved the treatment.
Oh god, yeah. Oh god, yeah. I think there needs to be a deeper understanding in actually how much drugs affect the brain and affects their thoughts on life. And when you get an idea in your head when you're on drugs, it's quite hard to get it out. And then you think of the damage and you think of how much it makes you paranoid. And then the paranoid starts to grow and then grow and then grow. And before you know it, then you've got problems. Chase did actually go to a psychic ward, um, psychiatry ward. He spent 2 days, just 2 days, in December in 1973. He actually walked into the emergency room, the American River Hospital, complaining about a variety of things that he'd imagined. He said that he couldn't breathe, that the blood had stopped flowing through his body, and that he was suffering. This is very, very bizarre, and I'm trying to say it without laughing. And it's not quite laughing because I find it funny, but it's that kind of way of it's so bizarre. But Chase claimed that he was having a cardiac arrest. That everyone knows a cardiac arrest. You're on that ground. You're out cold. But Chase was obviously um, saying that he was suffering a cardiac arrest. He also mentioned that he'd lost one of his veins. Um, the doctor noted in his report that Chase was tense, he was nervous, and he was very wild eyed. He was filthy, he was deteriorating, and he was foul smelling white male. Now, that is what the doctor had put in his report. Um, they actually diagnosed Chase with acute paranormal schizophrenia. though they said it was possible he was also suffering a drug induced psychosis. What's your thoughts?
I think that he had a number of different things that enhanced with the paranoia after he did the drugs, and he was probably still on the drugs whenever he had these type of things that he thought was happening to him. I'm sure it was more of the fact that he continuously thought about it and he was
Yeah,
paranoid.
yeah. No, I totally agree with what you're saying. Apparently, after being discharged, his mental health improved over the next 2 years. Once they started taking the hospital's medication, he was given an oxygen tank. Um, so he claimed his mother claimed that his mental state deteriorated once they started using drugs again. So he was clean. He did stop with drugs for 2 years, and then he went back to them. Um, he even had his mother had made some uh, claims that he began having trouble even signing his own name, and on 2 occasions, he also offered her to stop controlling his mind. He accused his sister of controlling his mind as well, and sometimes he would argue with her. But when you think about obviously what he's done, when we look at the murders, but even before that, Chase was actually arrested again in 1977. Um, his naked body was smeared with blood. A bucket of liver was found in his truck. Um, Witnesses claimed that Chase had a dog with him earlier that day, but it was never recovered, which makes me think it was a dog that he had murdered. When questioned by police at the scene, Chase claimed that the blood was seeping out of him and that he didn't know what happened to the dog. The blood was actually determined to be cow's blood. It wasn't dog. But that's not to say that he didn't kill the dog. What's your thoughts?
It's insane how he just like ventured off after being clean for 2 years and went back to the
Yep,
drugs, and then all of a sudden he blacked out apparently and didn't remember what happened to the dog, and he was covered in blood whenever he came back.
yep,
That's insane to think about.
yeah. Oh, as you just think to yourself, oh my god, what possessed you? Lynn says, think he has psychosis. He most probably had a panic attack, and that's why he thought he was having a heart attack. His heart was fluctuating. He might have panicked. This is very true, Lynn. It could have been a psychosis. Problem was, he was determined that he had schizophrenia, acute schizophrenia, but then it was said that he may have had drug induced psychosis, which everyone knows when you have drug induced psychosis, it affects your brain very badly. It affects how you see life, it affects how you see people. You may have paranoia that someone's trying to kill you, somebody is after you, um, God is appearing in front of you, ordering you to do things that you wouldn't usually do. It's how, again, it comes back down to how obviously the brain is thinking. Let's talk about the murders, Nina. He purchased a 22 caliber pistol in 1977. He lied about the history of mental health, his history of mental health, in order to do so, which I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, you take it you have to, your mental health gets questioned before you buy a gun.
It should be. It really should be. I
Uh,
don't know how he
it's
got
what.
away with getting a gun.
See, here's the problem. People can present very well. People can present extremely well. You look at the likes of Ted Bundy, who presented very, very well. Everyone thought he was amazing. Everybody thought he was a very nice guy. He presented very well up until the point of where I think Bundy knew himself there was no way out. So I'm assuming that Chase was pretty much the same. He presented very well to get what he wanted. He wanted that gun. For him to get that gun, he had to present very well himself. Um, Lynn says animals are an easy target and he took his temper out on them, but it used it as an excuse to practice his killings. Your dad says that, or he was a fib, which made the heart race anomally, which sometimes has the same symptoms of a heart attack. I totally agree. There's your dad. He's making me work, Nina. Back then, gun laws were different. It wasn't against the law to even carry a gun, so to get a possession of a gun wasn't that hard back then. I can imagine, David, that you could walk into any gun store, pick up any gun, and walk out the door quite easily. Um, he Neighbours complained about hearing shooting noises in his apartment. He claimed then that he was shooting at the voices in his head, um, with bullet holes in the walls, confirming this story. He continued to kill and eat dogs, and I'm poking at the thought of that just now, and would shoot them in the head, which made it easier for him to collect the blood, since he could put cups next to the bullet wounds. After killing small dogs, including a Labrador puppies, he eventually tried to steal a large St. Bernard's from a residence. For people that doesn't know what St. Bernard's dogs look like, watch Beethoven and you will see what a St. Bernard's looks like. Um, on December 29th, 1977, he killed his first human victim by a drive-by shooting. The victim, I will, when I'm doing the crime show, guys, I will keep the victims' names under wraps for the obviously respect to the family. But it was a 51-year-old engineer and a father of two. Um, he had been unloading the groceries in his driveway with his wife. Initially believed he had suffered a heart attack. The shooting actually baffled the police because it was random, it was motiveless. There was no excuse for killing that man. He actually claimed in the lead up to the murder he was angered by his mum's refusal to allow him to come over to her house in Christmas. She wouldn't allow him in the house. Um, that was because the sister was terrified of him, following that incident with the cat, and smearing the blood all over his body. What's your thoughts, Neela?
My thoughts are, it was, so at first he had the gun and he tried to shoot some lady that was in her kitchen, but he missed and it brushed past her and it was lodged into her cabinets. And then whenever he first got the kill, which was the engineer in the driveway, the cops were able to link that together and they found out that someone was intentionally trying to kill these people and it baffled them because there had never been anything like this in Sacramento.
I didn't actually know that he had attempted a woman before he went for the man.
Yeah, it was
It make
a woman in her kitchen.
it just makes you think what possessed him to go. I mean, imagine just being on your driveway, minding your own business, going about your day, and someone just randomly murders you with no excuse. But then 2 weeks later, after that murder, he actually attempted to enter someone's house, a woman's house, but because our doors were locked, he'd actually walked away. He went on to tell detectives that he took locked doors as a sign that he wasn't welcome, but unlocked doors was totally different. That was an invitation to come inside. On one occasion, he did enter someone's house by a couple. He went into a couple's house. He was caught and he faced off. Um, he went through their belongings. He basically peed and defaced on their infant child's bed and clothing. He broke into another house, attempted to actually set fire to the house. He believed the residents of this house had been spying on him, and he wanted them to leave the neighbourhood. So he thought by trying to burn down the house that that would be a way to get rid of them. What's your thoughts, honey?
It's insane how you go up to someone and you're like, yeah, no, I don't like you, so I'm gonna set your house on fire to try and get you to leave. Instead of like actually trying to get to know them, you're just gonna try and set their house on fire.
I think. Oh, morning, Eileen. I think for me, what I find very very bizarre about Chase is he seen the doors as a sign of, can I do it? Can I get away with it? And it was a case of, well, if the door was locked, okay, well, I'm not allowed to go in. But if the door was open, I'll happily go in there. And I just find that very, very, very bizarre how his mind worked. You've
And
now, on you go, honey.
usually back usually back in the day, it wasn't like you wouldn't have your door locked because it was like, oh, it's a nice neighborhood. I know people. I'm not going to lock my door because I feel safe. And so you'd think that he had more options because they'd think that they were safe.
Do you know, funny you say that, is how old are you again, Nina? 18?
Yep.
18, aren't you? 18. It's very, very strange hearing a 18-year-old say that, but it's very, very true in what you're saying. Back in the day, no one had to lock their doors. My gran used to talk about where they didn't lock their doors at all. They could go to the shop, they could come back, maybe they were out an hour, maybe they went to meet a friend in a coffee house. They would sit, doors would be unlocked, no one never went in, ever. So people then felt back then safe. But can you imagine your door's unlocked? You could be in your bedroom putting away washing, or you could be out somewhere and you come back and you find someone like Chase in your house. It's really a scary thought. Eileen says, I remember those days, Luby. I can imagine. Do you know my gran used to talk very fondly about the fact that the neighbours used to have parties and they used to be in and out each other's houses. You just don't get that anymore at all. In January 78, Chase broke into a house and shot a woman who was 3 months pregnant at the time. She'd been taking out the trash, and he actually first shot her in the hand as she actually attempted to protect herself. He then shot her in the cheek, breaking her jaw, before shooting her in the head, and he rendered her unconscious. Now, everyone, I've told you from the very beginning, this show is going to be very graphical. So, what I'm about to say next may upset people, but he went on to have sexual intercourse with her corpse, while stabbing her in the stomach with a butcher's knife from the kitchen. Multiple organs were removed, including the spleen, which was completely cut out of her body. Both her kidneys were severed, and he actually moved them around, placing them on the left side beneath her liver. He then cut off one of her nipples and drank her blood through a yogurt cup he'd found in her trash bag. He stuffed dog feces down her throat before leaving her in the house. Um, Despite wearing rubber gloves because he thought that would totally not like him, he made no effort to cover up the crime scene, and he actually left the butcher's knife at the scene. It was determined that she was still alive during some of the mutilation which occurred. And what I'm about to say is a bit daunting as well, but there was also an unborn fetus was also found. Her corpse was actually discovered by her husband, who was at work when the murder had happened. Um, he police called was called to the scene, um, and were told that the victim had been shot and opened up with a knife. They did their standard procedures, as cops do, to check if she was still alive, such as putting the flashlight into her eyes to see if there was any if her pupils would react. But it was pretty obvious that she was dead. Her eyes were open and her tongue was sticking out. Um, and one of the detectives actually said it was the most terrifying thing that he had ever seen in his life. What was your thoughts on that, honey?
It's already inhuman enough to cut open and rape a pregnant lady. He shoved dog feces down her throat, and I feel like that. I don't understand why he did that. It's just
It,
weird to think about.
it one of those ones, Nina, where it's very much, oh my god, it's like OMG. It's like what this man is spiraled out of control, to the point that he's actually doing this. Um, I will give you a quote to what the detective said. He said it was a horrific homicide because not only had he killed her, but she was pregnant at the time, so he killed an unborn child. Um, and another officer had said that he's been through a lot of homicide scenes, and took a lot of pictures and did a lot of evidence, and he was the strangest that he'd ever seen. Um, and it was terrible. Eileen says there's some real sickos out there, more making a statement, wanting recognition for his deeds. David, your dad says he was nuts, not hard to figure that part out, so he got murdered times two. I agree, folks. I agree. Um, Chase later told a psychiatrist that he spent the rest of the day watching TV after what he had done. In the following days, Chase had a phone call with his mum, and she said he talked about rockets, spaceships and little green men. Um, so from there, Chase entered the home of another 38-year-old divorced mother. He proceeded to murder everyone that was inside the building. Um, Chase said he was only semi-conscious when this had happened, so he wasn't very clear of events that had happened in this murder. Um, he shot one of them in the head, also fatally shooting in the head to another one. There was a 6-year-old involved and a 22-year-old, whom he attacked with a knife. Um, Again, necrophilia, cannibalism. Um, he cut open the organs. He still stabbed her in the anus and attempted to actually cut out one of her eyes. He managed to actually puncture her uterus. Um, Eileen says narcotics involved. I think pretty much so. Eileen, what's your thoughts, Neena?
I definitely think there was a bunch of drugs involved in this, making it worse.
Definitely. Your dad says, sorry I keep referring to him as your dad. Your dad says, I guess my question is, did he get evaluated medically before or after his killings? Well, this is the thing, David. It is said that he did get evaluated. Evaluated. Oh my God, Louise, get your words out hen. Um, and it was said that he had acute schizophrenia, or it was an drug-induced psychosis. Island's psychotic episode brought on by drugs. It definitely is. Um, he so Chase also stabbed another one in the anus and cut open a section of the back of his skull. So it would be easier to drink his blood. It actually suggests that Chase shot in the head while he was in the crib. It was the baby, and that the corpse of the woman was dragged to the bed in which it was found. There was a bathtub full of blood. Um, while the mutilations were occurring, um, there was actually a 6-year-old that began knocking on the door. Um, 3 different knives were used. Chase leaving 2 behind. He fled in the car and he went on to decapitate the baby and consume parts of the brain. When asked why he did this, he said that he claimed it was because he was hungry. What's your thoughts on that?
It shows you exactly how cold and uncaring he was, how inhumane he was. To be able to kill a baby in a crib and a child with their parents, it shows you just how bad he really was.
Yeah, no, I've got to say, Nina, it really does show, and this is a classic, and everyone will agree, this is a classic of where system fails people, and it's a classic of, yeah, we'll give them drugs. Now, personally, I think Chase should have been um, reprimanded and detained for indefinite in a mental hospital as soon as they knew there was a problem. Problem is, they just want to kick people out. Here's drugs. There you go. Take them. No any sort of um we will look after you when you're out in the community. We'll keep an eye on you. It's just a case get up and get on with it. David says because back then they would throw you in asylum for less married mothers, people with disabilities. I totally agree, David. Eileen says, I have a similar. A client thought he was the devil. I had to disarm him of a shotgun in public offices. Oh my god, Eileen. David says, it sounds like all of his crimes could have been prevented. Very much so. Um, Eileen says, such severe issues need containing. Definitely. The family, the girl who startled Chase, alerted a neighbour who called the police. The gentleman was lying in a pool of blood near the door when the police entered. It was difficult for the police because when you're going into a situation and there's children involved, but they did notice that the baby was missing. They wanted to believe that the baby was alive. Um, they actually discovered that Chase had left complete handprints and shoe imprints in blood, and due to the nature of the murder, they actually connected it to the murder beforehand. Um, but FBI profiler had assisted police during the investigations, and he created his own profile of the killer. He believed his killer was a white male. In his 20s, he was suffering mental illness due to how much evidence had been left behind. He also theorised that the killer's mental health issues began around 15 and had grown severely in the 8 years to the point of committing murder. During both murders, Chase was wearing an orange ski parka, and his father reportedly had bought him. But it just makes you think he was arrested after the woman came forward, um, and they searched his apartment. Now, what they found in his apartment was a complete horror. Um, they found Chase eating and drinking utensils were soaked in blood. There was several dog collars was also found. Rotten organs which belonged to animals and some of his victims. I do apologise, my throat does go from time to time. I do apologise, folks. Um, he kept some of his victims' possessions, shall we say, for trophies. He'd been reading gun magazines, psychology magazines, a book titled Psychic People. He'd circled classified ads in papers for dogs that were for sale. Um, he had written the word today in a calendar, with the word today being written on 44 more dates throughout 1978, which suggests to me um, that he basically was planning more murders had he not been stopped. Um, at first, Chase wouldn't let the police into his apartment, um, so they used the tact of "we're leaving." So it worked because Chase left his apartment, and then the police got him from there. Um, he was uncooperative with the police. He wouldn't work with the police. He claimed that he had only killed dogs. Um, and he claimed also he was being framed by the Italians. He he blamed the Italians, yes. He speculated that the murders had been committed by a blonde man in an orange jacket and that someone had been coming in and out of his apartment. It would actually take to 78 for the police to find the baby's decomposed corpse in the garage bin. It had been placed inside a box. A few days after his January interview, um, He was interviewed by psychiatrists and only went into vague detail about his mental health. When they asked what was on his mind, he wasn't forthcoming. They rephrased the question and asked what was on the screen of his mind, as if he was watching his thoughts on TV. That was their idea to see if Chase would be more open. Um, and Chase said normal things. He was talking about an exploding 747 jetliner. He also said that he'd seen UFOs, um, and incorrectly claimed that he was Jewish, saying that he was beaten up by gangs of Italians because of his ine- inefficacy. So, what's your thoughts?
It's so funny to me how he had all that evidence in his apartment, all that evidence left behind in the murders, and he still tried to claim that it was someone else, not him, and that he was the victim of all of it.
Yeah, I've got to say myself, I found that actually quite funny. I thought to myself, oh my god, I'm like, you're actually claiming it was Italians. Let's blame the Italians. I'm murdering everybody because they're Italians. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Isla says unimaginable horror. Your dad says, so glad I sat down to you while listening. Well, Mr. Moody, I did say that this show was very graphical. This show was very, very graphical. Island says trophy collection is common, very, very common. Eileen, did he have siblings? Yes, he had a sister who was terrified of him because of his behaviours. Your dad says the food is delicious though. You're some man. Some man. Um, so when we look at the aftermath when he stood trial in 1979, he was 6 counts of murder due to his delusions of being a process. He said he was a Jew. Chase wanted a lawyer from the Jewish Defence League, um, which got denied. His defence attorney, obviously, while in custody and awaiting trial, Chase claimed that the food he was being served was poisoned. He ordered his defence attorney to have the food tested, which they ended up they did, and it came back negative. In order, this is what I find very, very bizarre. In order to avoid the death penalty, the defence tried to have him found guilty of second degree murder, which would result in a life sentence. The case was based on his mental health and the suggestion that his crimes were not premeditated. What's your thoughts? Do you think it was premeditated? Or
I think it would have had to been, especially if he had went from murder to murder, taking out the organs every time and taking trophies. It had to be premeditated in order to actually be able to do those things.
I've got to agree. They actually said that Chase was the most deranged person MD had ever met, and that his case was one of the mental health diseases. Eileen's asking, is it nature or nurture? What's your thoughts on that one?
I forgot what the difference is.
Nature is you're born evil, you're born that way, or nurture is if you have trauma in your life and it comes from your childhood and that causes you to do what you do.
Okay. Well, then I definitely think it was nature because he didn't really have too bad of a childhood, and it mostly started whenever he started to get to the age of mental development and he started to take those drugs, which decreased his mental and development.
I've got to say, Eileen, I've got to agree with Nina. that is definitely nature because when I've researched his life, there's nothing to suggest that there's been any sort of trauma that he's had in his life, like um, abuse of any sort of kind. So I would have to say it's definitely his nature. David said absolutely it was premeditated. He has had a plan before. Um, Definitely, David. I would definitely say that. Um, but when you go to 1979, he was found guilty of 6 counts of first degree murder and rejected the argument that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. So even the jury didn't believe that he was had insanity. He was sentenced to the death penalty by the gas chamber. Um, but they did say that Chase was mentally disturbed. They're not denying that he wasn't mentally disturbed, but he still knew what he was doing was wrong. Doctors who interviewed Chase during the trial had came to the same conclusions. The fact that he wore gloves during the murder helped prove there was a level of premeditation. Um, he did a lot of things which tell you and show you what he was thinking. He took rubber. This is the bizarre thing about Chase. He took rubber gloves with him everywhere, but he would never ever clean up after himself. Um, Eileen says, I do agree that some can be born with some kind of brain disfigurement that influence things from day one. Electric wiring gone wrong, if you like. Some are innately evil. I have to agree with that. Um, Chase's inmates was aware of the extremely violent and grisly nature of his crimes, and they actually feared them. Prison officials often tried to persuade Chase to commit suicide, so it was actually so bad that the guards were even sent him to commit suicide because of how bad he was. Um, Whilst in prison, he had plenty of interviews. He spoke of his fears of the Nazis and the UFOs, claiming though he'd killed, it was not his fault. So again, we're going back into was not his fault. It was the Nazis and UFOs that possessed him to kill. Um, at 11 a.m. on the 1980, Chase was found dead in his prison cell. So this was to say that he had a drug overdose that treats depression and hallucinations. Chase took 36 times the normal dose and he'd be secretly hiding his pills in his cell, unbeknown to the prison officers. He was lying on his stomach with his head buried in the mattress and his legs extended out of his bunk. Sorry to be graphic at this time of the morning, folks. Next to the bed was 4 sheets of paper covered in handwriting. Two of them contained drawn squares filled with unknown code. Um, but early that morning, an officer who checked on case Chase observed that he was lying on his back and breathing normally. The exact reasons for Chase's apparently suicide remains unknown. So there you go, folks. There's our vampire of Sacramento. Um, David says he definitely got the worst punishment possible. The gas chamber was one of the harshest punishments at the time. Oh, he didn't even get the punishment, so no justice. Eileen says that act itself demonstrates lucid thinkings and dispels the insanity plea. I totally agree, guys. I totally agree. So, Nina, how have you enjoyed your first podcast? And let me say, folks, can I just say about this young lady? She's done extremely well, and I'm extremely proud of this young lady because she's held her own during this podcast, and this is her very, very first podcast. So I really want to do this, right? For surviving. How do you feel now that you've done a podcast?
I feel good. I didn't really feel nervous in the beginning.
I am so
It was
glad.
just,
I am so glad.
I thought it was
But
gonna be super
sorry,
fun to talk about serial killers. It's okay.
listen. Do you know that what I have the same? See, your dad says. Then dad came in. Listen, David, I am so proud of your daughter right now. So proud. And guys, only once did she have to say, "What did you say?" So I am extra. I must have been really good, and I've really slowed down. So Eileen says Nina could have Wayne on eek, but it's a very interesting topic. It is really very interesting topic. I want to thank you for coming in. I want to thank you for doing the podcast with me. Anytime you want to do the podcast, just drop me a message, definitely. Um, Next week, guys, on Thursday, in the Mystical Carousel show, we are talking. What are we talking? My brain is so tired. Oh, question mark that one. On Friday, we are talking about stone tape theory on Fools and Ghouls. Next Sunday morning, guys, at 6 a.m. UK time, we yeah, they're kidnapping you. Next Sunday, I will be talking about Ed Gein. I will 100% buzzing for Ed Gein because if I had to pick one person I love talking about is Ed Gein. So that is going to be an interesting one. Eileen says, gruesome stuff handled well. Thank you very much, sweetheart. Thank you very much. I do try and do the old tactic with it. And Eileen's like, Ed Gein, oh yes, definitely. I love Ed Gein. Right, guys, I'm going to call it a night because young Nina here, it's like, what time is it? 10 past 1?
It's 2:08.
Right, guys, I definitely need to call it a night for the young lady. But everybody have a good night, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And I will see you real soon, guys. Everybody take care. Bye, everyone.